Welcome to the Encouragement Engineering Podcast, where we combat the negativity that inundates our daily lives with a positive perspective and positive action. Today's guest is Geralyn Gendreau. Geralyn is a licensed psychotherapist since 1995 and a playful, soul-provoking life coach who loves to tackle the impossible. Her work is grounded in the insights of her mentor, Gene Liedloff, author of child-rearing classic, The Continuing Concept. As Liedloff's authorized biographer and self-appointed torchbearer, she sheds light on the possibility of radical shifts in our evolutionary trajectory. That's a mouthful. Through story and active engagement with the imaginal realm, she encourages people to reconceive what it means to be human and reconfigure their sense of self around the outrageous notion that we are designed to be happy. How about that? Her greatest passion is advancing the naturally good-humored child-rearing approach of our tribal ancestors and assisting people who did not have a fully enriched infancy and childhood to understand the impact of missing experiences and gain the insight, self-knowledge, and courage to live fully actualized life. So please welcome to the show, Geralyn Gendreau. Geralyn, thank you so much for being here today, and I really appreciate this. Is going to be a fun ride.
Totally my pleasure, Bob.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting because what you've done is quite different than most guests I've had. And we'll ask about what you did to get where you are, because I think that tells a lot about laying the foundation of what we'll talk about here. So if you could tell us how you got to where you are today.
Well, it was a long road. I grew up in a family of 6 with 3 brothers.
Okay.
So, and I was the toughest of them all. I mean, I always tell the story. We lived in Stamford, Connecticut, and the Stamford Advocate newspaper came to our house because they heard there were 3 boys and they were looking for a paper boy.
Oh.
I'm the one that volunteered. I'm like,
oh, lovely.
So I was riding my bike. It was just, I mean, I don't know. To this day, I think I'm the most unconventional in my family for sure. They're all married with kids and mortgages and the whole bit. But anyway, I've always been kind of, I guess, tuned to the, not to be trite, but a different drummer.
Right.
And then the big impact on my life, which I call not just a life-changing experience, but a life-shaping experience, was when I broke my neck in 1987. I'm dating myself here, but I wasn't really body surfing. I grew up body surfing. So we'd been out at Point Reyes National Seashore on the beach for several hours running around. I was training for my black belt. So I'm like sweaty and decided to just dash into the waves before we hiked 5 miles back to my car. And I ran into the surf like I had a million times before in Southern California, where there's this nice continental shelf that like rolls in from the Santa Barbara, the Channel Islands. And then, and in Northern California, it just like drops off. Right. It's like, so the waves slam the shore and I had no idea. I'd only been in the Bay Area maybe 2 years. So I went and, I'm like, whoa, that's a big wave. And I didn't know whether to go under. Usually you go under and you come up the other side. So I thought, excuse me, I'll duck and head first, top of my head. I didn't hit bottom. It was just the impact of the wave. Crushed C3, fractured C2 and C4. That's a sound when you hear it, you don't think you're going to survive. There's I won't go into the whole story of everything that happened, but I was rescued. I was paralyzed. I really think it was a divine intervention that prevented me from being paralyzed for the rest of my life. I had this, after kind of seeing God and understanding everything, and then getting slammed back into my body and rescued. And the moment when I was like, okay, I'm alive, I'm definitely not dead. And there's my hand and my hand won't move. It was like that moment, that shock of how come my hand won't move? So that day I had 2 experiences that changed everything. What occurred that I believe is why I was no longer paralyzed is I was creeping. I realized I was paralyzed. My girlfriend who had rescued me, my friend who was out there with me, she actually had lifeguard training.
Okay.
So she dragged me out and she saw that I was paralyzed and she had this thought and this is, I think, the divine intervention. The thought was, I need to make her move or she'll never move again.
Wow.
So she stood up over me and she started screaming, crawl. And I'm in this altered state where I'm kind of in the, in the in-between worlds. And that word, I say the word was made flesh, it hit my tailbone and I started to creep and crawl up the sand and saw myself as the first amphibian that ever came out of the sea. So that got me on this whole thing about evolution. Then when I made it up to dry land and the heat of the sun on the sand kind of snapped me back into like, okay, I'm human again.
Yeah.
And then it felt like the entire universe was this like sentient, loving energy surrounding me from all sides.
Wow.
And the voice in my head said, meet the beloved, which was a clue I picked up later. And then my thought was, this is how I'm supposed to feel. I felt completely at home in my body, completely loved, completely safe. This is my true state. This is how I'm supposed to feel. The next thought was, why haven't I ever felt this way before? Like, what?
Yeah, that human kicking in. Yeah, what?
That became like my life's mission, was to figure it out. Like, how come I don't feel that way?
Right.
So anyway, that was the beginning of this journey I've been on for more years than I'm willing to say at this moment in time.
Well, and that is a huge hurdle in itself and such an inspiring story that there's, like you said, that immense love that can be around us all. Now, what's interesting is you also went in your mentor, and not only did she read a book, did you go into the jungle as well, like she did?
No,
Okay.
I did not.
Tell us a little bit about that with Jean Liedloff, because that's interesting too.
So first I'll just say that after that experience, I hiked back to my the car with a fractured C3, crushed C3s, fractured C2, should have been in a wheelchair, hiked 5 miles back to the car, again, divine intervention. Yeah. And then I spent 4 months in a halo traction device.
Right.
So like this like metal ring and you're wearing the
and you can't move your head more than
immobilizes you.
Right.
And had spinal fusion surgery. See my gorgeous scars. So after that, before that I'd been bartending. I was bartending on Fisherman's Wharf and always wanted to go to graduate school. I'd actually had a therapist, my first therapist. I went on vision quests with her to the Trinity Alps. So I wanted to be the kind of therapist that took people out into nature. Interesting. Right. I haven't thought about that in a while. So I was on disability for like 1.5 years because I had a broken neck, couldn't work. So I started graduate school, went through 2 years of my master's, got my master's in counseling psychology. And I got to the other end and I was like, okay, now I know all about neurosis. I can name psychosis. I can name all the clinical symptoms of how messed up we all are. Where are the healthy people and how in the world did they get that way? That became my and I was working at Women's Alcoholism Center in the city at the time. I was doing an internship at Haight-Ashbury Psych Services and working overnight shifts at Women's Alcoholism Center. And so it was a family reunification program. So the women who were there, it was a year-long program. They'd all lost their kids to CPS, Child Protective Services, and they could have their custody of their children again if they stayed clean and sober for a year.
Right.
So we had this parenting manual and there were all these instructions about how they should treat their kids. And I was like, this ain't right. Like, this is not right. What do you mean you can't lay down with your kid when he's crying and wants to nap and help him fall asleep? Like what's up with that? And why let them cry themselves to sleep and scream in the other room? I was like, I think that kid needs something.
Yeah.
So I couldn't actually enforce the rules, the official rules anymore. So I quit. And then I read this book by Riane Eisler called The Chalice and the Blade. And it's a study of matriarchal cultures of old where they had the female deities and peaceful partnership societies instead of domination societies. And I was like, I wonder what their parenting manual would look like. And jokingly, I said to a girlfriend, I said, I think I need to find a time machine and go back to ancient times and see. And she was like, oh, you don't need to do that. Just read this. And she handed me the continuum concept.
Okay.
And that was another life-changing moment because Jean had gone to the Venezuelan rainforest in the 50s and lived with an indigenous tribe off and on for about 10 years. And then wrote this book about that. And it blew my mind. It absolutely, I was like, here's the answer. This is where we went wrong, that we now have a society of neurotics and we think that's normal.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you know, like we get fond of our neuroses. I'm fond of mine. I think they're kind of cute, but you know, there are times when they strangle me and I'm like, I get that. Why is this still happening? But you know, it'll last. I have a bad afternoon instead of a bad week or whatever. But it's so very interesting how our conditioning really alienates us from the happiness that is and the joy that's our natural state. So that's really.
Do you think it's partly, you know, what we've got so much? I mean, you know, our cell phone breaks and we complain about a broken cell phone. First world problems. You know, is it that type of scenario that possibly contributes to that? I mean, you're talking about people that are, you know, third world countries, base living. You know, there's a big difference in there. They're so thankful and appreciative, and they're in nature. I mean, how big of a difference is that?
Oh, it's like two different universes altogether. So we live in a society that is, we're always looking out there for the source of our happiness. We think happiness is an outside job. It's what we acquire. Right. It's how many likes we get on Facebook. It's a popularity contest on steroids. Yeah. Like I have to get on Instagram now and I'm like, oh God, I don't know. And I'm one of those people that goes back and like, how many people like? Didn't I get any comments? Like, and it doesn't really change my mood, but I watch myself doing it. And I think that's the key really, is to be able to witness your neuroses, you know, like if the minute I can watch where my mind's going and realize that it's in a loop that's not going to take me where I want to go, I can for the most part catch it and redirect. Right. I like to get physical to redirect things. You know, I have a couple yoga practices. I'll sit here in my chair and do this breathing. It's like, you know, rigorous, and it changes. It like shifts the it literally shifts where your neuro pathways are going to go. Tony and the same with deep breathing. Yeah. Pardon?
I said Tony Robbins talks about that, and he has I think it's a 3-minute breathing workout that he does before a lot of his events. Interesting.
It changes like you go from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system, and that calms you down. There's all this work now about the vagus nerve and just simple breathing practices, like inhale for 4 seconds. Hold it for 4 seconds, let it out slower. So like 6 seconds, exhale. And then like 5 or 6 of those completely shifts your heart rate variability, all that stuff. So we have options when we find ourselves in those conditioned states that are the opposite of what's going to get us, you know, the joy and love that we all want. That's what we all want. That's why we're on Facebook trying to like, perfect ourselves and win the homecoming queen or whatever it is.
Yeah. You know? It's interesting because you mentioned in your bio, it mentions, you know, the idea that we have the right to be happy. What a concept. I mean, you know, think about that. We have the right to be happy, and finding that, you know, that path, if you will. So what are some of the ways you help people to find that, if you will, that happiness factor?
So I just want to say that it's not so much a right to be happy. Like, I don't think we necessarily have a right. That's not the way I think of it. It's like, that's our natural state. Like we're designed that way.
Right.
Now you can say that was Jean's thing. The subtitle on one of her books was allowing human nature to work successfully. Okay. So right now you look around and say, yeah, human nature isn't working very successfully. Oh. I would say human nature is about as base as it can get in some corners. But I lost my train of thought. What was your question?
Just the happiness.
Oh, right. So for example, this is a good time for me to read you that excerpt in the book. Yeah. So this is her first trip to the Amazon, and she's deep in the Venezuelan rainforest. And she's going into Sanoma territory. They're the last tribe, the most primitive is the word that's used, but that's just our projection.
Okay.
But they were still considered cannibals, but they weren't eating their neighbors. They would go through a ritual where they would like, well, I won't go into it. Let's just say it's explained in the book though, so buy the book. So here's this scene. So Enrico, that's the Italian count that she convinced to take her with him on this diamond hunting expedition. They were diamond hunters and she tagged along. Enrico recognized this passage. He had traversed it before, and he began to describe the challenge that lay ahead in detail. We have to climb over the steep granite wall next to the Arpucci Falls, he said. How steep? Jean asked. Quite, Enrico replied, avoiding her eyes. This is the passage you told me about? Beppe frowned nervously. That's the little Italian fat man who financed the expedition. Yes, Enrico replied. Then with a single slow nod of his head, this is the one. Still avoiding Jean's gaze, he went on. They placed logs across the path of the canoe and haul it inch by inch. The sun is merciless. You could get heat stroke. He described the pain he'd experienced time and again when the canoe would slip into the crevice between boulders and pivot out of control, scraping his shins and ankles against the granite. Jean's face remained stoic. Beppe looked horrified. Fearing what lay ahead, the three of them spent several days bracing themselves for the hard work and pain that was sure to follow. They arrived at the waterfall full of dread and primed to suffer, already hating every moment of the portage. They started off grim-faced, dragging the canoe up the rocky slope. When the canoe swung sideways, the sheer weight of it would pin a member of the work party to a burning rock while the others scrambled to move it off. A quarter of the way up, all ankles were bleeding. By way of begging off for a bit, Jean jumped ahead to photograph the scene. She climbed up 10 yards and perched high on a rock. From that vantage point, at a distance from the action, she noticed a curious fact. There, before her, was a group of men engaged in a single shared task. Two of them were tense, frowning, losing their tempers at everything and everyone, cursing in the distinctive way of Tuscan men. The Terrapin guides, on the other hand, were having a fine time of it. They were laughing at the unwieldy canoe and making a game of the battle with gravity and rock. Between pushes, they showed off their scrapes and bruises when once again the canoe would wobble forward, pin one, then another of them underneath it. They responded with amusement rather than upset. The fellow who was held barebacked against the scorching granite invariably laughed the loudest once he could breathe again. All the men were doing the same work. All were experiencing strain and pain. All were sweating in the blazing hot sun. There was no different in their situations except one. Jean and the Italians had been conditioned by their culture to believe that such a combination of circumstances was at the very bottom of the scale of well-being. What's more, they were quite unaware that they had a choice, any other option, as to how they could experience the situation. The guides were equally unaware of their choice. These supposedly primitive people had also been conditioned to deal with their circumstances in a particular way. They knew what lay ahead, but hadn't spent the days before the trek wallowing in dread. Quite the contrary, they approached the portage in a perfectly merry mood. They seemed to revel in the camaraderie. Each forward move of the canoe was viewed as a victory, a cause for celebration.
That's great.
So, I am a storyteller at heart, and I love stories because they say what any number of words cannot say. Like, people read that or hear about that and they don't forget it right away. It's like, you can suddenly, when you're, moaning and groaning about whatever, like, oh, I could laugh at this. That's why I say one of the keys to happiness is the ability to laugh at yourself.
Right.
Now, I can't do it all the time. I haven't even perfected the art, but I know that when I do, that it can flip things and then possibilities emerge that wouldn't if I kept looking at it like we know that we've heard this, create your reality forever. What does that really mean? Like in practical terms?
Right.
So,
and it's always a good perspective, I think. We have to realize we're all going to have things happen in our life. That's life. Things are good, bad, indifferent. They're going to happen. But how your perception of it, your acceptance of it, your ability to know, hey, this can change for the positive is also a good thing. the opportunity to grow from it. That's harder for people to understand. That's harder for them to see. And you'll see that later, I'm sure, after the situation.
Right.
Yeah, I love that opportunity. They're laughing and having fun. Everybody's bleeding, bloody knuckles, burn, but hey, you may as well have fun with it.
You just made me think of, I think there is one rite of passage in the modern world, which unfortunately the pandemic pulled the plug on, and that's the Burning Man Festival.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever heard of it? Like,
I have
what?
heard of it.
That's like right up there with Sundance, is like the most pain you want to subject yourself to voluntarily. And yet, you do it because you're going to have a damn good time. There's no, I mean, nobody goes to Burning Man thinking they're going to be comfortable.
Right.
Except, if you go in a rock star RV and have, air conditioner and a refrigerator full of tequila. I don't know.
Yeah. That's something. But I mean, that's a perception that I think our society has forgotten. I mean, and I tell people this all the time. You have the power to change your direction in life by shutting off that big thing on your wall, that TV. Press the red button and turn it off.
Yeah.
We have that ability to look at something and say, hey, this is going to be fun. You're getting your hands dirty, you're in the mud, you're sweating, but you know what? The end result will be so cool. If you're in the garden planting something, imagine what it's going to look like in 6 months or a year from now, how it's grown and how it's, going to give the shade you want or whatever. It's, those are the things to look at that I think people forget to do. They're so focused on now, they're watching each step they take instead of where they're wanting to walk. And, it's important to see that direction where you're going. And it's I love that passage of, they're just smiling and having fun with it, even though they're, it's hard. So it's very interesting. Very interesting. One of the things that it mentioned, I think it was in your bio, or it says some ways that like people can get over early childhood traumas and hardships. What are some ways that you've seen to help people do that? Because I think that's a lot of times people hold on to things so long. We need to be able to let go of that so we can grow.
Well, trauma work is really advancing right now. The work of Steve Porges around the polyvagal nerve and the whole polyvagal system. So it's like coming to the fore the way when I was in graduate school, nobody had been talking about incest, and all of a sudden people were talking about incest, and now people are talking about trauma. People don't want to talk about it, but so there's lots and lots of really good somatic type work to do with it. From my point of view, there are several stages in it. One is to recognize what the trauma was. And for some people, this is why I talk about missing experiences, because certainly it's traumatic if your alcoholic parent knocks you around periodically, or if you watch the alcoholic parent knock the spouse around, or if you've been molested or, deprived of food and shelter, or your parents went through the Holocaust and they haven't really dealt with it. I mean, any number of things can cause trauma, but there's also the very subtle traumas. When what Jean observed among the indigenous people of the Amazon is that their child rearing practices, that the child was not on mother's body for the first 6 to 9 months of life.
Right.
So a human infant is born more helpless than any other mammal.
Right.
So, because when we went upright, the pelvis narrows, the baby has to come out early. Otherwise, so at the same time, we stand up and then we've got this frontal lobe, this big head.
Right.
So the baby has to actually come out prematurely, or the mother won't be able to give birth. So the human infant comes out very, very, very helpless, and where it belongs. Think about a kangaroo. Kangaroos, mammals who are upright but squat. So they also don't have, their infants are also born quite premature, not as premature as humans. So they've got a pouch. Mm-hmm. So they stick the baby in the pouch.
Right.
Well, we don't have pouches.
Yeah.
We don't have pouches, but we have opposable thumbs. and we learned how to make tools.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, bring this cloth that we made out of, and just tie the baby on your hip and go about your business. So baby care doesn't become, a thing to do separate from life. So that the infant learns about, first feels comfortable in its body because it's where it belongs. 7 million years of hominid evolution did not prepare us to be put in a pram and left to cry ourselves asleep. That would never have happened. And so our species was successful because our instincts, we trusted our instincts, the mothering instinct, the parenting instinct, the fathering, all that was instinctual intelligence that society has taken us away from. So even someone, for example, when I was born, the time when I was born, breastfeeding was discouraged. I was given formula. There was no holding. I mean, sure, my mom held me, but she certainly didn't strap me to her hip.
Right.
That the whole baby backpack, baby wearing, you've probably seen women with the baby just in a sling on their hip. And then there's the backpacks, the front ones with the baby on, there's a whole conversation about that I won't go into, but the just missing that's what I mean by missing experiences. That alone lays down a sense of, I'm not safe in the world. I don't have my right place.
Wow.
And that's one of the core, there are several very core, they're like anti-self feelings and like thoughts and self-conceptions.
Wow.
A lot of people have, I'm not the right stuff. There's something wrong with me.
Right.
I don't feel welcome here. Am I in the right family? But, I'm not enough is pretty foundational in Western society, at least.
Wow.
And it tracks back to not knowing that, because one's place is on mommy's body, or in the arms of another. Allo parenting in those societies wasn't something you had to set up. It was everywhere, like hand it off to the other woman if you got to go in the, there was always someone to hold the baby. So it's interesting because so many people have difficulty with dependence and independence. So a human infant is entirely dependent, would die left on its own. So by giving the child what evolution tells it needs and keeping the baby close to the body, in the Balinese culture, which is a continuum intact culture, they have a celebration when the baby's feet hit the earth for the first time when it's 6 months old.
Wow.
So that contact with a warm body so the dependency needs are met when they're truly dependent.
Wow.
So they become independent on their own.
Right.
Okay, good. I got those needs met. I know I'm safe. Now I can crawl off away from mommy because I know she's right there, and I'll keep checking, and then I'll go further and I'll be like, oh, she's right there. I can go back to her if I get scared or something happens. So there's a natural progression that in the absence of it, so nature can't tolerate a vacuum, and we are also born to adapt.
Right.
But each one of these adaptations, it's like you get a little twisted. But that's what you think is reality. It's like, oh, I have to wave my arms and make a fuss to get attention because my body's crawling, because I'm left in this like scratchy thing, and they're way over there, and I'm bored, and like a human infant in the mix, they learn just by passive observation. They are marinated in, this is what we do. This is what we do. This is how we talk. They talk and laugh all the time. They're building a house and everybody's sweating and they're laughing. They stop and sing. People wake up in the middle of the night and tell a crazy story and everybody laughs, and then they'll fall asleep again.
Wow.
It's like their life is joyous. Life is a celebration.
Yeah.
They make a party of things whenever they can. And this canoe story is such a beautiful, and like, you can't not see the point of that. It's that just obvious. It's like, oh, this isn't subtle at all. It's a complete, talk about a mindset shift.
Yeah.
But
and that's what's so interesting about it. I mean,
we can't like flip the switch and suddenly just be there.
Right.
But we can begin to notice when we're not. And sometimes it's just a little trim tab, like remembering that the last time I was in a panic, this happened to me just today. I was dreading a conversation with a client, forgot that I always knock it out of the park when I get there. But there's something about the so here's the other thing, because I'm not, and Gabor Mate talks about this a lot. He says, our trauma is our gift. Our trauma is your gold. It's what, it's the pebble in the pearl or whatever.
It's your
I don't
story.
know.
That's what
I
makes
don't
you
know about that, but it is what compels us to grow and
Yeah.
become, more sophisticated beings. So there's, yeah, I mean, I think I made my point.
Yeah. That's so interesting that, I think we've forgotten those things of nature. And just like you said at the beginning of our discussion, is that warmth, love feeling
Yeah.
that you had around you.
Yeah.
Why isn't that here everywhere? I mean, because our society's going 900 miles an hour, 20 different directions all the time, microwave society in a crock pot world. And we forget the idea that, we can cooperate with people and live in peace and joy. What have you seen that might help people to, I think the pandemic has kind of shown people that we can do this, but what are some other things that maybe people can look at to remember that and to integrate that into their life?
Well, again, I do think a lot of it is about awareness.
Mhm.
So, and intentionality as well. Like, just notice where you're unnecessarily creating conflict where there isn't really any. I had a moment. It was very early on in my publishing career, and I remember it was like I was fighting with people every day. And I was like, one day I was like, Geralyn, you're addicted to conflict. Like, really? Like, why are you always looking for trouble? Like, and a lot of the time it was just the lens I was looking for. And I think we have a certain threshold. It was like I was feeding on the, so it's like when you see a pattern like that, to really own it. And this is the thing about healing trauma too. One of the most healing things we can do is heal in a group.
Right.
It's like there's something about sharing your stories. Shame doesn't like to be talked about.
Right.
So telling your story that's part of why the 12-step programs are so successful.
Right.
People come together, they discharge all that what they've been like pretending doesn't, holding on to, and like to talk about it lets it go, and it kind of takes the lid off, and that's when the growth can start happening. So it's all very fascinating. It's just really like a journey to find what is the healing. And sometimes, like you said, we think it's not like everything's supposed to be joyous. Getting this book done was quite a process, like challenging me. I was on like 6 learning curves at the same time, like not getting enough sleep. But I hate to sound trite, but it's that old, anything worth having is worth working for.
Oh yeah.
But it's also important not to just like work so hard that you tank.
Yeah. You gotta enjoy it.
Yeah. Find some way to enjoy it, or at least weave enjoyment in there.
Make a game out of something. I used to do that with, work around the house my parents would make me do. And it was okay. All of a sudden I'm racing myself, seeing how fast I can weed the garden, or making sure I don't miss anything. And, just
that's a good one. That's a really good one.
Just something to bring in that excitement that of a boring task. You got to bring in that excitement. Something that's what are we gonna do here? How is this gonna turn out? And it's a future look of it can do, it can turn out this way, and we go for that goal. So
well, and your attitude has everything to do with the outcome and how you're gonna feel at the end of the day. I love that you're talking about this, making it playful, because this is one of the things that I really encourage people to do, is like, how can you work the play in there? Like, I just recently learned Canva. So, I was like, oh God, I'm not good at text and tech. And I'm like, okay, like how many times have I heard that before? And then I got this, okay, well, it was actually, I heard something and I thought, oh, I'm making it up that it's hard, and that's making it harder. So I thought I can just pretend this is my box of crayons.
There you go.
I used to love to get out the magazines and cut things up and make collages. And I'm like, just treat it like that. And it completely changed the experience. Good. Another big one is when you talk to customer service reps.
Yeah.
It's so easy to default to being angry and demanding and, self-righteous, those people. And that's the worst way to get what you want, because you put them in their brainstem and then they go to their script and their eyes glaze over and they just can't wait to get you off the phone.
Right.
I make it my job to make every time I talk to a customer service rep, almost every time, it's my job to make them laugh.
Good for you.
It's like, I'm going to make this person laugh, and I know it like uplifts them.
Yeah.
And me too.
It's a way of saying thank you. You know, it really is. You know,
it's a thankless job.
Yeah. No,
so you're a moment of light in their dark, dreary day. Hopefully they're having fun together, you know, in between calls. They're like,
right.
Wow, yeah, look at what this person did today. She wants Amazon Prime and she hasn't paid for it. You know, whatever. I don't know though. They may not be able to do that.
Yeah, no, that's a good philosophy, is make somebody laugh today and see how that turns out for not only you, but them. You know, that's a good way to look at things. Well, Geralyne, let's, if we can, tell people where they can find out more about you, your website, where they can get the book, etc.
Yeah, so the book is out. It's actually already an international bestseller. The best place to get it is actually on Amazon. Okay. And I don't know when you're hearing this, people, but for the first couple weeks, it's, what is today? June 22nd. For probably the next 2 weeks, you can get the Kindle for 99 cents. But definitely go to my website, junglegene.com, and you can give me your email address. I promise not to abuse it. And you'll be able to, you'll receive an audio. I read chapter 1. So one day I'm going to do the full audiobook. I dream of having this on Audible and I will read it myself. But right now you can get a taste of that. It's chapter 1 where she first goes into the jungle. And then I will put you on my email list, and I don't send out a lot, maybe once a week or every other week, and just let you know what I'm doing and what's happening in the Jungle Gene world. And I am also a writing coach. So people who want to write a book or something, I send out a lot of information about that. And there's a Facebook group. So yada, yada. Go to the show notes, send me an email, sign up on junglegene.com. And that's the best way to learn more about what I'm all about.
And it's a plethora of information. I reviewed the website and it's very intriguing, very interesting. So thank you for being a guest on the Encouragement Engineer, Geralyne. I really appreciate your time, appreciate the insight. It's always a joyous conversation. I appreciate it so much. So thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's really a pleasure to meet you and talk to your people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You have a good one.
You too.